My brother took the entire family farm and left me a useless hill, then he realized what he'd signed away. He smirked while claiming every acre that made money and told me to be realistic about the land no one wanted. I didn't argue, didn't explain, and signed without a fight. What he didn't know was that the hill he mocked had advantages no one ever bothered to look for, and by the time he noticed, the paperwork was already working against him. Hi, I'm Mark, 34, and the day my brother smirked and told me, "You can have the useless hill, what would you even do with it?" was the same day he signed away his future. Here's the punch to the gut right up front: my parents owned a $3.8 million working farm, flat land, irrigation rights, barns, equipment, the whole postcard, and when it came time to divide it, my older brother Ethan demanded all of it. Every acre that mattered. Every dollar-producing inch. And he left me with the hill. Not a hill. The hill. Steep. Rocky. No crops. No easy road access. The part of the property everyone joked about growing up. The place where dirt bikes stalled and cows refused to climb. The land my brother waved off like a bad coupon. I still remember him leaning back in Dad's old kitchen chair, arms crossed, grinning like he just outplayed me at chess. "Be realistic, Mark," he said. "You're not a farmer. Take the hill, sell it later for scrap land, and don't complicate this." Mom looked nervous. Dad stared at the table. The lawyer waited with his pen hovering. And me? I almost laughed. Because what Ethan didn't know, what no one in that room knew yet, was that while he'd been busy squeezing every drop of value out of what already existed, I'd spent the last 6 years learning how value gets created from nothing. I signed without arguing. No fight. No speeches. Just a clean signature and a quiet, "The hill is fine." Ethan blinked. Smiled wider. He thought he'd won. What he didn't realize was that hills don't look useless to someone who understands gravity, zoning loopholes, and patience. And that smirk? I still see it clearly. Because it's the same expression he wore right before everything started sliding downhill, fast. Hi, I'm Mark, 34, and the first thing I did after inheriting the useless hill was stop telling people what I was planning. Ethan celebrated immediately. Within weeks, he was posting drone shots of the farm online, talking about continuing the family legacy, shaking hands with suppliers, acting like he'd been crowned king of dirt. The flat land was productive, sure, but it was also expensive. Equipment leases. Labor. Water rights. Taxes. The kind of steady bleed you don't feel until it's everywhere. Meanwhile, I drove up to the hill alone. No audience. No nostalgia. Just me, the wind, and a stretch of land everyone else had written off. Here's what the hill actually had going for it: elevation, uninterrupted sightlines, and something the rest of the farm didn't: complete separation. Different access road. Different zoning history. A forgotten easement from the 1980s that never got folded into the main parcel because, back then, nobody cared. I camped up there the first night. Not because I'm sentimental, but because I wanted to hear it. Wind patterns. Road noise. How the sun moved. You learn more in 12 quiet hours than in 100 opinions. The next week, I started making calls. Not to farmers. To surveyors. County planners. An environmental consultant who owed me a favor. I asked boring questions that sound pointless until they don't. Questions like, what technically counts as agricultural use, and, when does a hill stop being farmland and start being something else? That's when I learned something fun. The hill was exempt from the same agricultural preservation rules as the rest of the property because it had never been irrigated. No water infrastructure meant no obligation to keep it productive. Which meant rezoning wasn't impossible, it was just slow. Slow doesn't scare me. Ethan noticed I was busy and assumed I was trying to sell. He called one night, laughing. "Let me know if you need help unloading that rock pile. I'll even give you a family discount." I told him I was good. What I didn't tell him was that the county planner had just said the words, "In theory, yes," which is government speak for this could absolutely work if you don't rush it. By month 3, Ethan was already stressed. Crop prices dipped. One of his tractors needed a repair that cost more than my car. He complained at Sunday dinners about margins and labor shortages, about how farming wasn't what people thought it was. I listened. Asked polite questions. Never mentioned the hill. By month 6, I filed the first quiet application. Not to build anything. Just to change what the land was allowed to become. And that's when the hill stopped being useless, and started being invisible leverage. Ethan still thought I'd lost. He had no idea the ground under him was already shifting. Hi, I'm Mark, 34, and the moment everything flipped was the day my brother tried to stop a project he didn't know he needed. It started with a letter. Ethan stormed into my place waving official-looking paper like it was a parking ticket. He didn't even sit down. "Why is the county asking me about your land?" he snapped. "They want environmental impact statements. Traffic flow. Sightline studies. What are you building up there?" I took the letter, skimmed it, and handed it back. Nothing yet. That answer broke something in him. Turns out, my rezoning request triggered a mandatory review of adjacent parcels, his farm included, because my hill sat above his primary irrigation lines. Gravity doesn't respect sibling rivalries, and neither do county engineers. Here's the part Ethan didn't anticipate. If my land changed use, his suddenly had new compliance requirements. Updated runoff management. Revised access routes. Fresh inspections. None of it fatal, but all of it expensive. Very expensive. He went from confident to furious in about 10 seconds. "You can't do this," he said. "That land was supposed to stay agricultural. Dad wanted it that way. Dad never wrote that down." Ethan hired a lawyer. A good one. I already had one. Mine specialized in land use fights that start friendly and end in spreadsheets full of regret. The county hearings dragged on. I showed up calm, prepared, boring. I talked about erosion control and visual impact. About how development could be less disruptive than overfarmed soil. I didn't raise my voice once. Ethan did. He argued intent. Tradition. Fairness. He talked about how the farm couldn't function if the hill changed. Which was ironic, because he'd called it useless 6 months earlier. The planner asked him a simple question. "Then why does your operation rely on infrastructure running through land you don't own?" Silence. 2 weeks later, the preliminary decision came in. My rezoning was approved, conditionally. His operation, however, was now non-compliant under updated runoff standards unless he made changes. Big changes. The kind that require permits, construction, and time he didn't have during harvest season. That's when the calls started. First polite. Then strained. Then desperate. He wanted me to delay. To withdraw. To be reasonable. I told him I'd consider options. I didn't mention that an energy development firm had just toured the hill, quietly, and called the view perfect. That elevation everyone ignored. Ideal for wind. The midpoint wasn't me winning. It was him realizing he might lose, and that I was the only person who could stop it. "Hi, I'm Mark, 34, and the first time my brother asked me for help, he didn't sound angry, he sounded scared." Ethan showed up unannounced just after sunrise, boots still muddy, eyes bloodshot like he hadn't slept. No speeches this time. No sarcasm. He just stood there and said, "I need you to pause whatever you're doing." Not please. Not can we talk. Just that. I poured coffee anyway. He finally explained what the compliance orders meant in real numbers. New drainage systems. Retaining work. Rerouted access roads. If he didn't act fast, he'd lose part of the season. If he acted fast, he'd be borrowing at terrible rates. Either way, the margins he'd bragged about were gone. "I never thought the hill mattered," he said, staring into the mug like it had answers. "I didn't think you'd do anything with it." I nodded. Let the silence stretch. Silence is expensive when you're the one paying interest. Then I told him the truth, most of it, anyway. That I wasn't building houses. That I wasn't flipping the land. That I'd been approached by a renewable energy firm looking for long-term leases. Low footprint. Quiet. Minimal traffic. Stable revenue. His head snapped up. You'd put turbines over the farm? On my land, I said. You already decided it was separate. That's when he realized what the hill actually was. Control. He asked what it would take for me to stop the project. I told him I wouldn't stop it, but I might structure it differently. Here's the offer I slid across the table: an easement agreement. Shared infrastructure planning. Coordinated runoff management that kept him compliant and let my project move forward smoothly. In exchange, I wanted two things. First, a formal acknowledgement that the hill was mine to develop, no interference, no future legal challenges. Second, a revenue-sharing clause if the turbines went live, because my land would be stabilizing his operation whether he liked it or not. He laughed at first. Then he stopped. Because his lawyer had already told him the alternative was worse. He signed 2 days later. Not happily. Not proudly. But carefully. Construction didn't start right away. These things never do. But the permits moved. The surveys finished. The energy company locked in a 30-year lease with options to extend. Ethan's farm stabilized. He told people it was all part of a long-term plan. He even started saying "we" when talking about land use, like the word might soften the memory. But the regret crept in slowly. Every time a turbine payment cleared. Every time my useless hill generated passive income while his tractors depreciated. He stopped smirking. And I stopped explaining. Jake didn't go quietly. 2 days after our showdown, I got served. Real envelope, real process server, real drama. Jake had filed for equitable redistribution of inherited property, claiming Dad intended for the land to be his. Claimed I'd misled him. Said I tricked him out of valuable assets. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee on the affidavit. My lawyer, Monica, who used to work oil rights litigation in Texas and had the professional empathy of a lawnmower, read through it with one raised eyebrow and said, "Cute. He's about to learn how intent holds up against signatures." We filed our response within 48 hours. Attached were the deed transfer, Jake's email calling it useless land, and a recorded phone call I'd made, legally, thanks, single-party consent state, where he referred to the hill as dead real estate for decorative squirrels. Monica included a highlighted copy of the mineral survey and, just for fun, the geologist's valuation estimate. Jake's lawyer folded like a card table. Still, the local gossip fire had already started. I started getting calls from old neighbors. Is it true about the hill? You really found minerals up there? Jake says you swindled him. Said you knew the land was worth millions. I kept my answers polite and boring. The land was part of the inheritance. I took what I was offered. I'm developing it. That's all. Jake, meanwhile, was doing press, local press, but still, crying about family betrayal and how he'd worked that land with his bare hands. The article's headline was, "Brotherly Betrayal, $1 Million Minerals Split Farm Family." They even got a photo of Jake looking sad on the tractor seat like he was auditioning for a soap opera. You know what I was doing while Jake was trying to go viral? Finalizing the lease with the mining firm. The terms, an initial signing bonus of $400,000, with a projected royalty stream in the high six figures annually, plus a clause that let me keep full ownership of the surface land, so I could still build if I wanted to. Jake called me 3 times the day the lease was announced. I didn't answer. He finally showed up at my gate, this time, not with swagger, but with shoulders slumped like a man who'd bet the farm and realized too late that the prize was buried next door. You really not gonna talk to me? He asked. I looked at him for a long time. Do you remember what you said the day you handed me the hill? I asked. He blinked. I reminded him. You said, may it one day grow moss. He said nothing. I leaned on the gate. Jake, that hill didn't grow moss. It grew freedom. And I'm not giving that back. 3 months later, the first drill rig arrived on the hill. It was early, sun just peeking over the ridge, when the crew started laying down mats and unpacking the equipment. The whole thing looked like a sci-fi invasion to anyone who wasn't in on it. Jake definitely wasn't. He stood at the edge of his field, arms crossed, watching like the machines might decide to eat his corn. I gave him a nod. He didn't return it. He hadn't spoken to me since the gate conversation. Not really. There'd been a few passive-aggressive texts, "Hope your robots don't explode LOL, and one weird rumor that he tried to pitch a TV show to a reality network called Farm Feuds. Nothing came of it. Meanwhile, I got busy. With the lease money, I paid off my student loans, bought Mom a proper retirement condo near the lake, and finally replaced my rusted-out Ford with a quiet little EV that Jake mockingly called the Toaster. I also hired a local construction crew to build a small, modern cabin on the hill's edge. Nothing fancy, steel roof, solar panels, wraparound porch with a view of the valley Jake thought he'd own forever. Every morning for weeks, I drank coffee on that porch and listened to the drills work below while birds hollered from the trees like they were in on the joke. The best part? The title on the cabin mailbox, the Moss House. Just for me. A few months later, Mom called me out of the blue. She'd been staying quiet through all of this, but I think the silence finally got heavy. "Jake's struggling," she said gently. "Not asking for anything. Just thought you should know." I nodded even though she couldn't see it. "I know," I said. "But struggling is what happens when the lies run out." She sighed. "He keeps saying you tricked him." "Let him," I said. "I didn't." She was quiet for a while, then added, "Your father would have been proud." That one hit harder than expected. I kept my voice steady. "Thanks, Mom." The mining operation stayed small, surgical, as they called it. Low impact, high yield. I visited the site twice a week, consulted with engineers, even pitched in on design tweaks. Funny how the guy with the useless hill became the one wearing a hard hat and getting nods from execs. Jake eventually stopped looking up when I drove by. He planted more corn. Bought a new sprayer. Tried to act like nothing had changed. But it had. Everything had. The guy who used to call me soft for doing brain work had handed me a hill, not knowing it was the only part of the farm with a future. And I, the little brother, the quiet one, the afterthought, turned that hill into an empire. Now, when I walk the ridge at dusk and feel the wind cutting through the brush, I don't feel small. I feel like the man Dad hoped I'd be when he left that hatch waiting for me. Not the strongest. Not the loudest. Just the one who knew where to dig. And who never, ever underestimated the value of a hill.